Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The city skyline shimmered under the moonlight, its golden hues reflecting off the towering skyscrapers. But inside the luxurious bar at the heart of downtown, Edward Carter sat alone, his fingers lightly swirling the amber liquid in his glass. The powerful and ruthless CEO, known for his cold heart and undeniable charisma, had never been a man to chase after love. His life was built on numbers, deals, and empires, leaving no room for emotions. Tonight, however, something in the air felt different. A quiet restlessness stirred within him, an inexplicable pull that made him want to escape the suffocating weight of his routine. He had come here for a distraction, but he never imagined he would find something far more intoxicating than whiskey. And then she walked in. Eliza stepped into the bar, her delicate fingers tucking a loose strand of her dark brown hair behind her ear as her striking hazel eyes scanned the room. She wasn't the type to visit such lavish places, but tonight was an exception. Dressed in an elegant yet simple black dress that clung to her curves just enough to enhance her beauty without screaming for attention, she carried an air of innocence, mixed with an unintentional allure. Edward noticed her immediately, his sharp, predatory eyes locking onto her as if drawn by an invisible force. There was something about her, something different, not like the countless women who threw themselves at him, desperate for his wealth and power. No, she was untouched by greed, and that intrigued him. Their eyes met, and the moment stretched longer than it should have. Eliza felt a strange heat rise in her cheeks as Edward's gaze burned into her, making her heart race inexplicably. She looked away quickly, settling at the bar a few seats away, but Edward was not a man to ignore his instincts. Something about her told him she didn't belong in this world of deception and luxury, yet here she was, and he wanted to know why. Without hesitation, Edward stood, his tall, imposing frame exuding dominance as he approached her. "You don't seem like the type to drink alone in a place like this," he murmured, his deep voice smooth as silk, yet holding an undeniable authority that sent shivers down Eliza's spine. Eliza turned, meeting his piercing blue eyes, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. His presence was overwhelming, his chiseled jawline, the slight smirk on his lips, and the confidence that radiated from him effortlessly. She swallowed, trying to steady herself. "And you don't seem like the type to strike up conversations with strangers," she countered, her voice soft yet laced with quiet strength. Edward chuckled, a rare, genuine smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe tonight's an exception," he said smoothly, his fingers resting lightly on the bar as he signaled the bartender. "What are you drinking?" Eliza hesitated, biting her lip. "Just a cocktail." Edward raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, you don't come to places like this often." She nodded, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her dress. "It's not really my scene." Edward tilted his head, intrigued. "Then why are you here?" Eliza hesitated before exhaling softly. "Sometimes you just need a change of scenery, a little escape." Edward studied her, sensing there was more to her words than she let on. He didn't press, but the way she spoke, the way her eyes held a quiet sadness, made something in his chest tighten. He wasn't a man to care about anyone's story, yet for some reason, he wanted to hear hers. They talked about nothing and everything. The time melted away as the conversation flowed effortlessly between them. Edward found himself captivated by her, the way she laughed softly, the way she spoke with such honesty, unfiltered and real. And for the first time in years, he felt something shift inside him, an unfamiliar warmth. One drink turned into two. The air between them grew thicker, charged with an undeniable pull neither could ignore. Edward leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. "Come with me." Eliza's breath hitched. "Where?" "My place," he said, his eyes darkening, filled with unspoken promises. "Just one night." Eliza knew she should say no. She wasn't the kind of girl who did things like this. But the way he looked at her, the way her heart pounded wildly at his proximity, she couldn't resist. Just this once, she wanted to let go. Wordlessly, she nodded. The ride to his penthouse was silent yet electric with tension. The moment they stepped inside, Edward wasted no time. He closed the door, and before she could process anything, he was there, towering over her, his hand slowly sliding to her waist, pulling her against him. "You have no idea what you do to me, Eliza," he murmured, his breath hot against her skin as he leaned down, his lips hovering over hers. "Tell me you want this." Eliza's heart pounded as she looked into his intense gaze. "I do," she whispered. That was all he needed. Edward crushed his lips to hers, devouring her in a kiss so deep, so passionate, it left her breathless. His hands explored her body, igniting a fire within her she had never known before. Every touch, every kiss was filled with hunger, with need. But when he finally laid her down on the bed, something shifted. As he traced kisses down her neck, his hands moving to remove the last barrier between them, Eliza stiffened. Edward pulled back instantly, sensing her hesitation. "Eliza?" She bit her lip, her cheeks flushing. "Edward, I'm." His eyes widened as realization dawned on him. "You're a virgin?" Eliza nodded, her face turning red. She expected him to pull away, to be disappointed, but instead, something in Edward's eyes changed to fierce possessiveness. A primal hunger, mixed with something deeper, something dangerous. "Damn it, Eliza," he whispered, cupping her face gently, his voice rough with emotion. "You should have told me. I thought..." "It didn't matter," she admitted softly. Edward exhaled sharply, brushing his thumb across her lips. "It matters more than you know." He swallowed hard, his voice thick with desire. "I need you, Eliza, but only if you're sure." Eliza met his gaze, seeing nothing but raw sincerity in his eyes, and in that moment, she knew there was no one else she wanted more. "I'm sure," she whispered. Edward's control snapped. That night, he didn't just take her, he worshipped her. Every kiss, every touch was slow, deliberate, filled with unspoken promises. He made love to her as if she was the most precious thing in the world, and by the time the night ended, something irrevocable had changed between them. As Eliza lay in his arms, breathless and dazed, Edward held her tightly, his lips brushing against her forehead. "I need more nights with you, Eliza," he murmured, his voice raw. Eliza's heart skipped a beat. She had no idea that this one night would change her life forever. Edward Carter had never felt this way before. As the first rays of morning light filtered through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, he lay awake, his powerful arms wrapped around the delicate, sleeping form of Eliza. He could still feel the softness of her skin against his, the way she had trembled under his touch, the way her lips had parted as she whispered his name with unfiltered passion. He had never taken a woman's innocence before, never even considered what it would mean to do so. But last night had been different. It had been more than just pleasure, more than just another forgettable night in his endless line of meaningless encounters. He had felt something raw, possessive, and dangerously addictive. He tightened his hold around her as if trying to anchor her to him, unwilling to accept that she might disappear when morning fully arrived. His entire life had been built around control, power, and the certainty that nothing could shake him. But now, staring at Eliza's peaceful, sleeping face, he realized he was losing control, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to stop it. Eliza stirred slightly, her long lashes fluttering before her hazel eyes opened, still dazed from sleep. As she blinked up at him, Edward felt his chest tighten. She was beautiful in the morning light, her hair tousled, her lips slightly swollen from his kisses. A lazy smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Morning," he murmured, his deep voice husky from sleep. Eliza's eyes widened slightly, as if reality was only now sinking in. Her cheeks turned a soft shade of pink as she shifted slightly under the sheets, her body still sore from the passion of the night before. "Morning," she whispered back, her voice barely above a breath. Edward brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her skin. "How do you feel?" he asked, his tone unusually gentle. Eliza swallowed, unsure of how to answer. She had given herself to a man she had met only hours before, and yet she didn't regret it, not even for a second. Something about Edward made her feel safe, made her feel wanted in a way she never had before. "I feel..." She hesitated, then gave him a soft, shy smile. "Good." Edward's blue eyes darkened at her words, a smirk playing at his lips. "Good," he repeated, his voice teasing yet laced with a possessiveness she didn't quite understand yet. He leaned closer, his lips brushing against the shell of her ear. "Because I'm not done with you, Eliza." A shiver ran down her spine as his words settled between them. She had expected last night to be just that one night, but now, looking into his intense gaze, she realized Edward had no intention of letting her go. Her heart pounded as his fingers traced over her bare shoulder, sending electric sparks through her veins. "Edward," she started, but before she could say more, his lips captured hers in a slow, devastating kiss, stealing whatever protest she might have had. His hands roamed over her body, reigniting the fire that had consumed them the night before, and just like that, she was lost again, lost in his touch, in his scent, in the way he made her feel like she was the only woman in the world. Hours later, when they finally emerged from the cocoon of his bed, Eliza sat wrapped in his silk sheets, watching as Edward dressed. His movements were precise, effortless, each button he fastened reminding her of the world he came from, the world she didn't belong to. As he adjusted his tie, he turned to face her, his piercing gaze locking onto hers. "Stay," he said simply. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. "Edward, I need more nights with you, Eliza," he interrupted, stepping toward her, his hands bracing on either side of her as he leaned down. "I don't want last night to be the only time I have you." Her heart pounded, confusion swirling inside her. "Edward, we barely know each other." "Then let's change that," he murmured, his fingers brushing against her cheek. "Stay with me." Eliza hesitated. It was tempting, God. It was tempting, but she had a life outside this penthouse, even if it wasn't as glamorous. She bit her lip, her voice hesitant. "Edward, I have things to take care of." Edward's jaw clenched at her words. He didn't like the idea of her leaving, not after what had happened between them. "What things?" he asked, his voice sharp with irritation. Eliza sighed, lowering her gaze. "It's complicated." For the first time since they met, Edward sensed hesitation in her. His fingers curled under her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Tell me." Eliza took a deep breath. "I'm struggling, Edward, financially. I work 2 jobs just to keep up with rent, and even then, it's barely enough. That's why I was at the bar last night. I just needed to forget for a little while." A flicker of something dangerous passed through Edward's eyes: anger, possessiveness, frustration. He hated the idea of her struggling, of her worrying about something as trivial as money, when he had more than he could ever spend in a lifetime. And more than that, he hated the idea of her needing an escape from her own life. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice controlled but tense. Eliza frowned. "Because it's not your problem." "It is now," Edward shot back, his gaze unwavering. Eliza blinked. "Edward, I'll take care of it," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I won't let you struggle, Eliza." Her heart clenched at his words. No one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever cared enough to offer help without expecting something in return. But Edward silenced her with a kiss slow and deep. When he pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. No arguments. "You're mine now," he murmured, "and I take care of what's mine." Eliza's breath hitched, her entire body trembling at the intensity in his voice. She knew she should protest, tell him she couldn't just accept his help so easily. But deep down, she also knew there was no walking away from Edward Carter, not now, not ever. As she stared into his stormy blue eyes, realization settled in. This wasn't just a one-night fling anymore. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous, and she had no idea if she would survive it. Edward Carter had always been a man of control. Every aspect of his life was meticulously planned, his emotions locked away behind the steel walls he had built over the years. He didn't do attachments, didn't allow himself to feel beyond the surface, but Eliza had destroyed that control in a single night. Now, as he sat in his office, surrounded by towering glass windows that overlooked the city he ruled, he couldn't concentrate on anything but her. His body still ached for her, his mind unable to move past the way she had felt beneath him, the way she had surrendered so sweetly, trusting him with something she had never given to anyone else. The thought of another man ever touching her, of anyone else ever knowing the pleasure of her soft gasps, sent a violent rage coursing through his veins. She was his, and he would make damn sure she knew it. Pulling out his phone, Edward dialed his assistant. The moment the call connected, his voice was sharp, commanding. "I want every detail on Eliza, where she lives, where she works, her financial situation, everything." His assistant, already used to his no-nonsense attitude, didn't even hesitate. "I'll have the information in an hour, sir." Edward ended the call without another word, his jaw tightening. He had told Eliza he would take care of everything, and he meant it. He would not allow her to struggle, would not allow her to worry about bills or rent or anything else that kept her away from him. She belonged in his world, now wrapped in his silk sheets, crying out his name every night until she was utterly consumed by him. A slow smirk played on his lips at the thought. She had no idea what she had done to him, how she had awakened something dark, something obsessive inside him, and he wasn't about to let her go. Meanwhile, Eliza stood outside her tiny apartment, staring at the pile of overdue notices stacked in her mailbox. A heavy sigh left her lips as she pulled them out, her heart sinking further with each bill. Rent was due in 2 days, and she barely had enough left to cover groceries, let alone the amount her landlord was demanding. The reality of her life hit her hard, replacing the dreamy haze of last night with cold, hard truth. She had let herself get lost in Edward, allowed herself to drown in the fantasy of being wanted, of being cherished. But the morning after had brought her back to reality. She was just a struggling woman in a world that didn't care about innocence or fairy tales. And Edward Carter, he was untouchable. A billionaire, a man who had probably already forgotten about her. She should forget about him too. But then her phone vibrated. Eliza hesitated before pulling it out, her breath catching when she saw the message. "Edward, I don't like waiting, Eliza. You didn't call me." Her heart pounded as she stared at the words. He wanted her to call? Why? Did last night mean something to him too? She bit her lip, hesitating before typing back. "Eliza, the first didn't think you wanted me to." His reply was instant. "Edward, the first told you I need more nights with you." A shiver ran through her at the possessiveness in his words. It wasn't a request, it was a demand. He wanted her again. Her fingers trembled as she typed. "Eliza, Edward, 1. I don't know if this is a good idea." Minutes passed without a reply, and she exhaled shakily, thinking maybe he had changed his mind. But then her phone rang. Edward's name flashed across the screen, and before she could stop herself, she answered. Eliza, his deep, authoritative voice sent a shiver down her spine. "Why are you hesitating?" She swallowed hard. "Because I don't know what this is," she admitted. "I don't know what you want from me." Edward's voice darkened. "I want you, Eliza, and I don't share." Her breath hitched at the intensity of his words. "Edward, where are you?" he interrupted. Eliza hesitated, glancing around the street. "I just got home." "Good, stay there." Before she could question him, the call ended. A sense of nervous anticipation settled in her stomach. What did he mean by stay there? Was he coming to her? She barely had time to process the thought before a sleek black car pulled up in front of her apartment building. Her eyes widened as the driver stepped out, walking toward her with practiced professionalism. "Miss Eliza?" Eliza nodded hesitantly. "The CEO sent me. He's waiting for you." Her heart pounded as she stared at the car. Edward had sent someone for her? How had he even found out where she lived? The thought sent a mix of fear and thrill rushing through her veins. She should say no, should turn around and go back inside, but she didn't. She found herself stepping forward, sliding into the back seat of the luxury vehicle. The drive was silent, the tension thick in the air. When they pulled up to a towering glass skyscraper, Edward's corporate headquarters, her stomach tightened. What was he doing? The driver led her inside, straight to the top floor. The moment the elevator doors opened, Edward was there, leaning against his desk, his piercing blue eyes locked onto her, as if he'd been waiting all day just for this moment. The sight of him stole her breath. He was dressed in an expensive black suit, the jacket unbuttoned just enough to reveal the strong line of his chest. His tie was slightly loosened, as if he'd been restless, impatient. And then he moved. In seconds, he was in front of her, his large hands gripping her waist, pulling her flush against him. "Eliza," he murmured, his voice dangerously low. "I told you I don't like waiting." Her breath hitched. "Edward, But he didn't let her finish. His mouth claimed hers in a deep, searing kiss, one that stole the very air from her lungs. His grip tightened, his hands possessively tracing over her body, as if reminding himself that she was real, that she was his. When he finally pulled back, his gaze burned into hers. "Did you really think I'd let you walk away?" Eliza swallowed hard, her body trembling under his touch. "Edward, this is happening so fast." He smirked, his thumb brushing against her lower lip. "Not fast enough." His eyes darkened. "You're mine now, Eliza. Say it." Her heart pounded. "Edward, say it," he demanded, a war raging inside her. But in that moment, with his hands on her, with the way he was looking at her as if she was his entire world, she knew there was no escape, not from him, not from this. "I'm yours," she whispered. Edward exhaled sharply, his grip tightening as his lips found hers once again. And in that moment, Eliza knew there was no turning back. Eliza barely had time to process the words that had just left her lips before Edward's mouth claimed hers. Once more, his kiss hungry, desperate, as if the mere thought of her hesitating had driven him to the edge of madness. His large hands gripped her waist possessively, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them, only heat, only the thunderous pounding of her heart against his chest. She could feel the raw strength in his touch, the way his fingers dug into her skin as if branding her, marking her as his. It terrified her how much she wanted this, how much she craved the way he made her feel desired, cherished, worshipped. She had never felt like this before, never known that a single man's touch could unravel her so completely. "You don't know what you've done to me, Eliza," Edward growled against her lips, his voice thick with obsession. "I told you I don't share, and now that you've given yourself to me, I won't let you go." Her breath hitched, a shiver racing down her spine at the dark promise in his tone. Edward, she wasn't even sure what she was going to say, but it didn't matter. He wasn't interested in words. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms, carrying her across the lavish office like she weighed nothing, his every step filled with purpose, with unshakable determination. The moment he reached the long leather couch by the window, he laid her down gently, his intense blue eyes never leaving hers. He hovered over her, his strong hands braced on either side of her, caging her in. "You belong to me now, Eliza," he murmured, his lips brushing against the sensitive skin of her neck. "Say it again." Eliza's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. She could see the fire burning in his gaze, the unrelenting possessiveness that sent both fear and excitement coursing through her veins. He wanted to hear her say it, needed her to admit that she was his, and maybe she was. Maybe she had been his the moment she walked into that bar, the moment she met those stormy blue eyes that saw straight through her. "I'm yours," she whispered, barely able to recognize her own voice. Edward groaned, his lips capturing hers in another punishing kiss, his body pressing against hers in a way that left no room for doubt. This man wasn't just claiming her body, he was claiming her soul. His fingers slid down her waist, tracing the curves he had memorized last night, igniting a fire in her blood that she had never known existed. Every touch, every kiss, every breath he took against her skin sent her deeper into the whirlwind that was Edward Carter. "I need you again, Eliza," he admitted against her lips, his voice hoarse with need. "I thought I could be patient, but I can't. I need more. I need all of you." Eliza's body trembled at his words, at the sheer desperation in his tone. How could a man like Edward, a billionaire, a man who could have anyone be so obsessed with her? But as he kissed her, as his hands explored her body with a reverence that made her feel like the most precious thing in the world, she realized it didn't matter. Right now, in this moment, she was the only woman he saw, the only woman he wanted. And God help her, she wanted him just as badly. She reached up, threading her fingers through his dark hair, pulling him closer as she kissed him back with the same fervor, the same need that burned through her veins. Edward groaned in approval, deepening the kiss, his control slipping with every second that passed. When they finally pulled away, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers, his fingers tightening on her hips, as if grounding himself. "Move in with me," he murmured suddenly, his voice still thick with passion. Eliza's eyes widened. "What?" Edward lifted his head, his gaze locking onto hers with unshakable determination. "Move in with me," he repeated. "I won't have you living in that tiny apartment, struggling to pay your bills. I told you I take care of what's mine." Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. This was happening too fast. Just yesterday, she had been a stranger to him, a woman he met in a bar, and now he wanted her to live with him? "Edward, this is not up for discussion," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're mine, Eliza, and I protect what's mine." Eliza swallowed hard, her mind racing. This was insane. She should say no, should walk away before she got in too deep. But as she stared into Edward's intense blue eyes, as she felt the heat of his body against hers, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was already in too deep. There was no walking away from this man, not now, not ever. Eliza's breath was uneven, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears, as Edward's words sank into her soul. Move in with him? The billionaire CEO, who had taken her innocence, who had awakened desires she never knew existed, who had claimed her with a dangerous obsession, was now demanding that she belong to him in every possible way. Her mind screamed that this was reckless, that she barely knew him, that she should walk away before she lost herself completely. But her heart, her body, the very core of her being told a different story. They craved him. They needed him. And as Edward's intense blue eyes bore into hers, filled with an unwavering determination, she knew there was no escaping this man. He would never let her go. She started, her voice barely a whisper as her lips trembled with uncertainty. Edward's grip on her waist tightened as he leaned in closer, his warm breath caressing her skin, making her shiver. "Say yes, Eliza," he commanded, his voice low, seductive, but carrying an undeniable authority. "Don't fight me on this. I want you with me. I need you with me." His confession sent a rush of emotions through her, a dangerous thrill mingling with the deep yearning he had ignited in her. How could she say no to a man like him? A man who could easily discard her, yet was doing the opposite, demanding to keep her close, to take care of her, to make her his in every way possible? "Edward, this is happening too fast," she whispered, trying to grasp onto the last shred of logic she had left. Edward let out a frustrated growl, his hands sliding up her sides, sending a heated shudder through her. Fast? His lips traced along the column of her neck, his voice dark with longing. "I haven't been able to think about anything except you since last night. I've never wanted anyone the way I want you, Eliza. I don't care if it's fast. All I know is that I need you in my bed, in my arms, every damn night, and I won't take no for an answer." His possessiveness was intoxicating, consuming her completely. Every word dripped with obsession, making her body ache for him, making her heart pound with something dangerously close to surrender. Eliza's lips parted, her resistance crumbling as Edward's hand slid beneath her blouse, his fingertips grazing the delicate skin of her waist, igniting a fire that burned through her veins. "Edward," she breathed, her voice trembling with need. His lips curved into a smirk against her skin, as if he knew exactly how close she was to giving in. "Say yes," he murmured, his voice husky with desire. "Say you're mine." His fingers trailed higher, brushing against the softness of her curves, making her gasp. "Say it, Eliza." She was drowning in him in the way he touched her, the way he demanded her with such raw, unrelenting passion. She had never belonged to anyone before, had never given herself to a man until Edward. And now, as he held her, as he claimed her with every touch, every whisper, she realized the truth. She was already his heart, body, and soul. "Yes," she whispered, surrendering completely. "I'm yours." Edward's eyes darkened, a dangerous satisfaction flashing across his features before his lips crashed against hers, claiming her in a deep, searing kiss that stole the very air from her lungs. His hands gripped her hips, pulling her flush against him as he devoured her, his hunger insatiable, his touch possessive. Eliza moaned against his mouth, her fingers tangling in his dark hair as she clung to him, lost in the storm of desire he had unleashed. In one swift motion, Edward lifted her into his arms, carrying her effortlessly as he strode toward the massive bedroom adjoining his office. The door slammed shut behind them, sealing them in a world where nothing else existed, except the fire burning between them. Edward set her down on the soft mattress, his body hovering over hers as he gazed down at her with unrestrained hunger. "You have no idea what you do to me, Eliza," he murmured, his fingers tracing along her jawline before tilting her chin upward. "You drive me insane." Eliza's breath hitched as his hands moved lower, exploring her body with a reverence that made her tremble. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered word sent her deeper into the abyss of passion, making her forget everything except the man before her. She arched beneath him, surrendering to the intoxicating sensation of his lips trailing down her neck, of his hands claiming every inch of her, as if she was the most precious thing in the world. Time blurred as the night became a symphony of whispered promises and desperate moans, of tangled sheets and fevered kisses. Edward worshipped her, adored her, made her feel like she was the only woman in existence. And as she lay in his arms afterward, her body still trembling from the intensity of their passion, she realized something terrifying. She was falling for him hard. Edward tightened his grip around her, pulling her against his chest as he pressed a lingering kiss to her temple. "I don't just want more nights with you, Eliza. he murmured against her skin. I want forever. Eliza's heart skipped a beat, her breath catching at the raw emotion in his voice. She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. Edward? His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face as he gazed at her with a fierce intensity. You're mine now, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. And I'm never letting you go. Eliza knew then that she was truly lost, because no matter how dangerous, how all-consuming Edward Carter's love was, she didn't want to escape. Eliza lay in Edward's arms, her body still tingling from the fire he had ignited within her, her heart racing as his fingers traced lazy circles along her bare back. The warmth of his embrace, the steady rise and fall of his chest beneath her cheek, should have calmed her, but instead it only heightened the storm brewing inside her. She had never felt anything like this before. The raw intensity, the unrelenting passion, the way Edward looked at her, as if she were the only thing that mattered in the world. It terrified her, thrilled her, and made her ache for more all at once. Edward's grip tightened around her, as if sensing her thoughts, pulling her even closer against him. You're thinking too much, he murmured, his deep voice vibrating through his chest. What's going on in that beautiful head of yours? Eliza swallowed hard, her fingers absently tracing along the sharp lines of his jaw. Us. It's happening so fast. Edward let out a low, amused hum, his lips curving into a smirk. Fast? Not fast enough, he countered, tilting her chin up so their eyes met. The dark hunger in his gaze sent a shiver down her spine. I want more. Eliza, more nights, more days, more of you in my arms. I want you in my bed every damn night. His thumb brushed over her lower lip, his voice dropping to a husky whisper. Tell me you want that too. Eliza's breath hitched, her body betraying her even before the words left her lips. I do, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I want this. I want you. A dangerous satisfaction flickered in Edward's eyes before he rolled her beneath him, his body pressing her into the mattress as he claimed her lips in a deep, possessive kiss. His hands roamed her body, as if memorizing every inch of her, his touch sending heat spiraling through her veins. Eliza moaned into his mouth, arching beneath him, losing herself in the intoxicating sensation of his skin against hers. Edward broke the kiss, his lips tracing a path down her neck, his breath warm and teasing. Say it again, he demanded, his voice rough with need. Eliza's heart pounded as she gazed up at him, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. I want you, Edward, she whispered. Only you. A growl rumbled deep in his chest before he claimed her again, his movements more urgent, more desperate, as if he needed to brand her, to make sure she never doubted who she belonged to. The night stretched on, filled with whispered promises and fevered touches, with moans that melted into the darkness. Edward worshipped her, consumed her, made her feel like she was the center of his world, and Eliza let him, surrendering completely, letting him erase every doubt, every hesitation. When the first light of dawn began to filter through the curtains, Eliza stirred, her body deliciously sore, her heart still pounding from the intensity of the night. Edward was already awake, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist, his gaze dark and unreadable as he watched her. Morning, she murmured, her voice husky. Edward's lips curved into a slow, wicked smile. Morning, he echoed, his fingers trailing down her arm. I hope you're not expecting to leave this bed anytime soon. Eliza laughed softly, shaking her head. I have work, Edward, and so do you. Edward's expression darkened instantly, his grip on her tightening. You're not going back to that job, he stated firmly. Eliza blinked in surprise. What? He sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You told me about your financial struggles, about how you're barely getting by, he reminded her. I told you I'd take care of what's mine. You don't need to work anymore. Eliza sat up, pulling the sheet around her as she stared at him. Edward, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't just stop working. I need to stand on my own 2 feet. Edward's jaw tightened, frustration flashing in his eyes. Why? When I can give you everything? Eliza reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. Because I don't want to just be someone you take care of. I need to know I can survive on my own. Edward exhaled sharply, running a hand through his messy hair. You're stubborn, he muttered. Eliza smiled softly. And you're possessive, Edward smirked, pulling her back into his arms. Damn right I am, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her bare shoulder. But fine, I'll let you work just for now. but I'm still moving you in with me. No arguments." Eliza sighed, knowing there was no winning against him. And maybe she didn't want to win. Maybe she wanted to be his, to belong to him the way he wanted her to. As she lay back against his chest, she realized something. Edward Carter was a man who got what he wanted. And right now, he wanted her. And God help her, she wanted him just as much. Eliza stirred awake, her body still aching deliciously from the night before, her skin carrying the evidence of Edward's relentless passion. The sunlight peeked through the heavy curtains, casting golden hues across the luxurious bedroom. But the warmth that enveloped her wasn't from the morning light, it was from the strong arms wrapped tightly around her, the possessive grip of a man who had made it clear that she belonged to him. Edward was still asleep, his face buried in the crook of her neck, his bare chest pressed against her back, his breath hot and steady against her skin. Even in sleep, his hold on her was firm, unyielding, as if afraid she would slip away. But Eliza had no intention of running, not when every fiber of her being craved him, needed him in ways she had never known possible. She turned slowly in his embrace, her fingers grazing the hard contours of his jaw, tracing the faint stubble that made him look even more devastatingly handsome. Edward Carter, the ruthless billionaire, the man feared by many, looked utterly at peace as he slept beside her, as if she were the only one who could silence the chaos in his world. Her heart clenched at the thought. Could she really be falling for him? Could a night of passion truly bind them together in a way neither had expected? Before she could lose herself in her thoughts, Edward's grip tightened, his body pressing closer, a deep, satisfied hum vibrating through his chest. "You're staring," he murmured, his voice husky with sleep, his lips curving into a slow, wicked smile. Eliza's breath hitched as his blue eyes fluttered open, still heavy with desire, darkened with something even more dangerous than lust obsession. "I wasn't," she lied, trying to pull away, but he only tightened his hold, rolling her onto her back beneath him. His smirk deepened as he hovered over her, his gaze drinking her in like a starving man. "Liar," he murmured, brushing a thumb across her swollen lips. "You can't take your eyes off me, just like I can't take mine off you." Eliza's pulse quickened, her breath coming faster as his hands trailed down her sides, igniting a fire in her veins. "Edward," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. He silenced her with a deep, possessive kiss, his tongue teasing hers, his body pressing her into the mattress as if he needed to feel every inch of her. She moaned into his mouth, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, surrendering to the overwhelming force that was Edward Carter. He was relentless, insatiable, worshipping her with a hunger that never seemed to fade. When he finally pulled away, his breath was uneven, his eyes filled with dark intensity. "You're mine, Eliza," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "Say it." Eliza's heart pounded as she gazed up at him, her fingers tracing the lines of his face. "I'm yours," she whispered, knowing there was no point in denying it anymore. Edward exhaled sharply, as if those words had shattered something inside him. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, his lips trailing heated kisses along her skin. "I'm keeping you, Eliza," he murmured against her skin. "I don't care what it takes. I won't let you go." A shiver ran down her spine, a mixture of fear and desire curling in her stomach. Edward wasn't just falling for her, he was obsessed. And the terrifying part was, she was beginning to feel the same way. After what felt like hours tangled in the sheets, Edward finally let her up, though not without a few lingering kisses and possessive touches that left her breathless. As she slipped out of bed and reached for her clothes, Edward propped himself up on one elbow, watching her with a lazy, satisfied smirk. "Where do you think you're going?" Eliza raised a brow at him, buttoning her blouse. "Work." Edward's smirk vanished instantly, his expression darkening. "I told you, you don't need to work anymore." Eliza sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Edward, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I can't just stop working. I need to stand on my own 2 feet. His jaw tightened, frustration flickering in his eyes. "You're mine now. That means I take care of you." Eliza reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "I don't want to be just someone you take care of. I want to know I can survive on my own." Edward studied her for a long moment before letting out a resigned sigh. "Fine," he muttered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "For now." Eliza smiled, pressing a quick kiss to his lips before standing. "Good. Now I really need to get going." Edward narrowed his eyes but didn't argue, though she could feel the weight of his gaze following her as she dressed. As she reached for her purse, he spoke again, his voice softer this time. "Come back to me tonight." Eliza's heart skipped a beat as she turned to face him. "I will." A satisfied smirk played on his lips. "Good, because if you don't, I'll come find you." Eliza rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile as she left the room. Edward Carter was impossible, but he was also irresistible. And as much as she hated to admit it, she was already addicted to him. Eliza stepped out of the luxurious penthouse with trembling legs, her body still carrying the remnants of Edward's passionate touch. Every inch of her felt branded, claimed, owned by him. The night they had shared had been beyond anything she had ever experienced, raw, unrestrained, and filled with a kind of hunger that bordered on obsession. Even now, as she walked toward the street, she could still feel his lips against her skin, his whispered words lingering in her mind like an unshakable spell. "You're mine, Eliza. Say it." And she had said it. She had surrendered to him completely, letting him consume her in a way that no man ever had. But as much as her body craved him, as much as her heart was beginning to fall into the abyss of his love, a part of her still feared the intensity of his obsession. Edward Carter wasn't just a man who loved, he was a man who possessed. And she knew that once he decided something belonged to him, he would never let go. Eliza exhaled sharply, shaking her head as she flagged down a cab. She needed to clear her mind. Her life had been simple before Edward stormed into it, before he shattered every rule she had set for herself. But now, things were different. He was different, and she had no idea what to do about it. As she climbed into the cab, her phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out, her heart skipping a beat when she saw his name flashing on the screen, Edward. Already? She hesitated for a moment before answering. Edward, his deep velvety voice sent a shiver down her spine. "You didn't text me when you left." Eliza blinked, biting her lip. I didn't think I needed to." "You do," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I need to know where you are at all times, Eliza." A mixture of warmth and unease curled in her stomach. "Edward, I can't have you tracking my every move. I need space." There was a pause, a dangerous silence that made her breath hitch. Then his voice came, softer, yet just as possessive. "I can't give you space, not when I'm already addicted to you." Her heart pounded, her grip tightening around the phone. She should tell him that his intensity scared her, that his obsession was suffocating. But instead, her traitorous lips whispered, "I'll see you tonight." A deep, satisfied hum echoed through the line. "Good, because, Eliza, I don't know what I'd do if you stayed away." The call ended, leaving her with a racing heart and a mind full of conflicting emotions. She was falling too fast, and Edward was pulling her deeper with every possessive word, every lingering touch. By the time she arrived at work, Eliza was still lost in thought, barely hearing her coworkers as they greeted her. She sat at her desk, attempting to focus on the files in front of her, but it was impossible. The scent of Edward was still on her skin, the memory of his body, tangled with hers, still fresh in her mind. Her distraction did not go unnoticed. "Eliza," a familiar voice called, breaking her trance. She looked up to see her boss, Mr. Adam, standing beside her desk with a concerned expression. "Are you all right? You seem preoccupied." Eliza forced a smile, shaking her head. "I'm fine, just a little tired." Mr. Adam gave her a knowing look. "Well, try to get some rest. We have a big meeting later, and I need you focused." She nodded quickly, grateful for the brief escape. But as soon as her boss walked away, her phone buzzed again, another message from Edward. "Edward, you didn't eat breakfast. Have lunch at the restaurant across the street. I made reservations for you." Eliza sighed, running a hand through her hair. The man was relentless, but instead of feeling annoyed, she felt cherished. He cared in his own intense, possessive way. Deciding not to argue, she left for lunch as he instructed, stepping into the elegant restaurant, only to find Edward already waiting for her at a private table. Her breath caught. He looked devastatingly handsome in his crisp suit, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. The moment she entered, "I thought you were working," she asked, taking a seat across from him. Edward smirked, his gaze dark with amusement. "I was, but then I realized I couldn't go a whole day without seeing you." Eliza's heart stuttered. "Edward, the first told you, Eliza," he murmured, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I don't do casual. When I want something, I don't hold back, and I want you." A lump formed in her throat. This is happening so fast. Edward leaned closer, his fingers tightening around hers. "Not fast enough," he said, his voice dropping, his eyes blazing with unspoken promises. "Tonight, you're coming back to me." Eliza swallowed hard. She knew she should slow things down, should set boundaries, but as she gazed into the eyes of the man who had turned her world upside down, she realized one thing: she didn't want to resist him. "Okay," she whispered. Edward's smirk deepened. "Good girl." And just like that, she was his again. That night, as she stepped back into his penthouse, Edward wasted no time in claiming her. The moment the door closed, he had her pinned against it, his lips crashing against hers, his hands roaming her body with desperate need. "I waited all damn day for this," he growled, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. "I need you, Eliza. I need every inch of you." Her body responded instantly, melting against him as he carried her to the bedroom, their clothes disappearing along the way. The night was long, filled with whispered confessions and gasps of pleasure, with Edward worshiping her in ways that made her dizzy. And as they lay tangled in the sheets afterward, his arms locked around her as if afraid she would disappear, Eliza realized something terrifying. She was no longer just addicted to Edward Carter, she was in love with him, and there was no turning back. Eliza lay in Edward's arms, her body still humming from the night they had shared, her breath uneven as she traced slow, lazy circles on his bare chest. His strong arms were wrapped around her, holding her close, as if he never wanted to let her go. The scent of passion lingered in the air, a mixture of his cologne and the intoxicating heat that had consumed them for hours. She should have been exhausted, but sleep was the last thing on her mind. Her heart was racing, her thoughts spiraling as she replayed every whispered confession, every possessive touch that had left her breathless. Edward shifted beside her, his fingers sliding down her spine in a slow, teasing caress. "You're still awake," he murmured, his deep voice thick with satisfaction. Eliza turned her head to meet his gaze, her cheeks warming at the way he looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. "I can't sleep," she admitted softly. His smirk was lazy, his fingers tilting her chin up as he traced the outline of her lips with his thumb. "Thinking about me?" Eliza rolled her eyes, but the flutter in her stomach betrayed her. "You're impossible." Edward chuckled, but the amusement in his eyes quickly faded, replaced by something deeper, something raw and unspoken. His fingers tangled in her hair as he pulled her closer, his lips brushing against her forehead. "You drive me crazy, Eliza," he whispered, his voice husky with emotion. "I can't stop thinking about you. I don't want to stop." Her breath hitched. "Edward, I mean it." He shifted, rolling her beneath him, his body pressing against her as his eyes searched hers with an intensity that made her heart ache. "I've never wanted anyone the way I want you. It's not just desire anymore. It's something more. Something I don't think I can control." Eliza's heart pounded. She knew Edward was a man used to control, used to bending the world to his will, and yet here he was, looking at her like she was the only thing that could break him. She swallowed hard, her fingers tracing the hard lines of his jaw. "Edward, are you saying you?" Before she could finish, his lips crashed against hers, silencing her in a kiss that was desperate, consuming, as if he needed her to feel everything he couldn't put into words. Eliza melted against him, her hands fisting in his hair as he deepened the kiss, his body pressing her into the mattress with a hunger that sent shivers down her spine. When he finally pulled away, his breath was ragged, his forehead resting against hers. "I don't know how to do this, Eliza," he confessed. "I don't know how to love, how to be what you need, but what I do know is that I can't let you go." Eliza's eyes softened as she cupped his face. "You don't have to be perfect, Edward. You just have to be you." Something flickered in his eyes, something dangerously close to vulnerability. But before he could say another word, his phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the moment. Edward let out a frustrated sigh, reaching for it, his expression instantly darkening when he saw the name flashing on the screen. "What is it?" Eliza asked, concern lacing her voice. Edward's jaw clenched as he sat up, running a hand through his tousled hair. "It's about work. Something I need to handle." Eliza sat up with him, pulling the sheets around her. "Do you have to go?" Edward hesitated, as if torn between his responsibilities and the woman in his bed. Then, with a deep breath, he turned to her, cupping her face. I'll be back before you know it." Eliza nodded, trying to ignore the strange pang in her chest as he stood, slipping into his clothes with practiced ease. But just as he reached for the door, he paused, turning back to her with a look so intense it made her breath hitch. "Eliza," he said, his voice low, rough, "you're mine. And when I get back, I'm going to prove it to you all over again." A shiver ran down her spine as she watched him walk away, leaving her alone with nothing but the echo of his words and the dangerous realization that she was already in too deep. The night stretched long as Eliza sat by the window, wrapped in one of Edward's crisp white shirts, her bare legs curled beneath her, her mind lost in a whirlwind of emotions. The penthouse was silent, yet her heart pounded with anticipation, her fingers gripping the edge of the silk sheets as she waited for him to return. The city lights shimmered through the glass, casting a soft glow across the room, but nothing could distract her from the aching need growing inside her, the need for him. She could still feel the ghost of his touch, the heat of his lips, the possessive way he had held her, as if she were the only thing that mattered in his world. And that was the terrifying part, because somewhere along the way, she had fallen for him, fallen so deep that there was no way out. She had never expected this, never expected to meet a man like Edward Carter, a man who could unravel her with just a look, a touch, a single whisper. He had turned her world upside down, and now, as she waited for him, she realized just how much she needed him, how much she longed to hear his voice, feel his hands on her skin, drown in the intoxicating heat of his presence. The sound of the front door unlocking sent a shiver down her spine, her breath catching as she turned her head. And then there he was, Edward Carter, tall, powerful, devastatingly handsome in his tailored suit, his tie loosened, the top buttons of his shirt undone, revealing a hint of his chiseled chest. His blue eyes locked onto her, instantly dark and burning with something raw, something unrestrained, something dangerous. The air in the room shifted, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. He didn't say a word, he didn't need to. His gaze spoke volumes, his entire presence commanding her attention, setting her body ablaze with anticipation. He stepped forward, his movements slow, predatory, and Eliza could feel her pulse quicken, her fingers trembling as she gripped the fabric of his shirt tighter around her body. But before she could say anything, he was in front of her, towering over her, his presence overwhelming. His hands reached for her, fingers tilting her chin up, forcing her to look into his eyes. And what she saw there stole her breath away. Hunger, obsession, possession. "You're still awake," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that sent shivers down her spine, his thumb tracing the soft curve of her lower lip. Eliza swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "I couldn't sleep." Edward smirked, but there was no amusement in his eyes, only desire. "Thinking about me?" Eliza wanted to deny it, wanted to push him away, but the truth was written all over her face. "You're impossible," she said instead. Edward chuckled, but the sound was dark, filled with something primal, something uncontrollable. "You have no idea how much I wanted to come back to you," he admitted, his fingers tangling in her hair, pulling her closer. "I spent the entire night thinking about you, wanting you, needing you." Eliza's breath hitched as he leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear, his voice sending a delicious tremor down her spine. "I should have never left." Eliza's heart pounded. "Then why did you?" Edward's jaw clenched, his fingers tightening around her waist. "Because if I hadn't, I would have lost control. I would have spent the entire night making you mine over and over again, until you forgot everything, except my name." Heat coiled low in Eliza's stomach, her body betraying her as she shivered under his touch. "Edward," she whispered, his lips hovering just above hers, teasing, taunting, driving her insane with anticipation. "Tell me you missed me," he demanded, his voice rough with need. Eliza bit her lip, refusing to give in so easily, but Edward wasn't a man who accepted defiance. With a low growl, he lifted her effortlessly, his arms wrapping around her as he carried her toward the bedroom, his grip firm, possessive. Eliza gasped, wrapping her arms around his neck, her heart racing as he kicked the door shut behind them. The moment her back hit the mattress, Edward was on top of her, his weight pressing her into the sheets, his body caging hers in the most delicious way. His hands roamed over her, exploring, leaving trails of fire in their wake. His lips found hers in a kiss so deep, so consuming, that it stole the very air from her lungs. "You're mine, Eliza," he murmured against her lips, his hand sliding down her body, igniting every nerve. "Every inch of you belongs to me." Eliza arched beneath him, her nails digging into his back. "Then prove it." And he did. The night was a blur of tangled limbs, heated whispers, and endless waves of pleasure that left Eliza breathless, trembling, utterly consumed by him. Edward worshipped her, claimed her, possessed her in a way that left no doubt she belonged to him. And he belonged to her. It wasn't just about passion anymore, it was something deeper, something unbreakable, something neither of them could deny. Hours passed, the darkness outside giving way to the soft glow of dawn, but neither of them slept. Edward held her close, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her bare skin, his lips pressing gentle kisses along her shoulder. "You're not just a fling to me, Eliza," he murmured, his voice raw with emotion. "You never were." Eliza turned her head, her heart pounding. "Then what am I?" Edward's blue eyes burned into hers, filled with something so deep, so intense, that it made her breath catch. Everything. And in that moment, Eliza knew there was no going back. She was his, and he was hers forever. Eliza lay breathless in Edward's arms, her body tangled with his, her heart still racing from the night of endless passion that had left her utterly shattered and completely his. The warmth of his embrace, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek, and the possessive way his arm tightened around her waist sent shivers down her spine. The night had been long filled with unrelenting desire, whispered confessions, and the kind of love that left no room for doubt. She was his, and he was never letting her go. She shifted slightly, her fingers tracing the hard ridges of his chest, her lips pressing against the smooth skin just above his heart. Edward stirred, his grip on her tightening, as if he feared she would disappear the moment he let her go. His deep blue eyes fluttered open, darkened with the remnants of passion and something far more intense: obsession, devotion, a love so deep that it consumed them both. "You're awake," he murmured, his voice husky from sleep, his fingers trailing down her spine in slow, lazy circles that sent warmth spreading through her veins. Eliza smiled against his skin, her heart swelling at the tenderness in his voice. "I didn't want to leave your arms," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Edward exhaled, shifting so that he was hovering above her, his strong arms caging her beneath him, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that sent her pulse skyrocketing. "Good," he murmured, brushing his lips against her forehead before trailing them down to her cheek, her jaw, and finally, her lips. "Because I never want you to leave, not now, not ever." Eliza swallowed hard, her fingers curling into the sheets beneath her as he deepened the kiss, his lips moving against hers with a hunger that left her breathless. Every touch, every caress, every whispered word of possession made it impossible to think of anything but him, of the way he made her feel cherished, adored, desired beyond reason. Edward pulled back slightly, his fingers brushing her hair away from her face, as he studied her with a look that made her heart tremble. "Eliza, do you know what you've done to me?" he asked, his voice rough, filled with something raw and unfiltered. "I was fine before you. I was in control. My life was simple. But then you came along, and now—" He shook his head, his jaw tightening as if he was struggling to find the right words. "Now I can't breathe without you. I can't think. I can't function unless I know you're mine, that you'll always be here in my arms where you belong." Eliza's chest ached at his confession, her fingers reaching up to cup his face, her touch gentle, reverent. "Edward," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, "I don't want to be anywhere else. I don't want to be with anyone else. I'm yours." Edward exhaled sharply, his lips capturing hers in a kiss that was both desperate and reverent, as if he was sealing a promise neither of them could break. His hands roamed over her body worshipping, reminding her with every touch, every whisper, every heated caress that she belonged to him. The hours passed in a blur of tangled sheets, whispered moans, and the kind of love that left no space for doubt or hesitation. Edward made love to her, as if he was trying to imprint himself into her very soul, as if he needed to ensure that she could never forget the way he made her feel like. She was the center of his universe. When the sun finally peeked through the curtains, bathing the room in a golden glow, Eliza lay exhausted in Edward's arms, her body spent, her heart so full of love that it threatened to burst. She traced lazy patterns on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, feeling the way his fingers continued to skim over her skin as if he couldn't stop touching her, couldn't bear the thought of distance between them. Edward let out a slow breath, his lips brushing against her temple as he pulled her even closer. "Eliza," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I want forever with you." Eliza's heart stopped, her breath catching in her throat as she pulled back slightly to look into his eyes. "Forever," she whispered, searching his face for any hint of hesitation. But all she saw was certainty, devotion, and an overwhelming need that mirrored her own. Edward nodded, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek. "Yes, forever," he said firmly. "I don't just want you in my bed, Eliza. I want you in my life. I want to wake up to you every morning, fall asleep with you in my arms every night. I want you to be mine in every way possible." Tears pricked at the corners of Eliza's eyes, her heart aching with a love so strong it left her breathless. "Edward," she whispered, her fingers trembling as she cupped his face. "Are you saying—" Edward exhaled sharply, as if gathering his courage before he leaned in, his lips barely brushing against hers as he whispered, "Marry me, Eliza." Eliza's breath hitched, her entire world tilting on its axis, as she stared at him in shock, her mind racing to process the weight of his words. Marry him? Be his forever? The thought sent warmth flooding through her veins, sent her heart soaring in a way she had never imagined possible. But before she could respond, before she could even gather her thoughts, Edward's phone buzzed loudly on the nightstand, shattering the perfect moment between them. Edward cursed under his breath, his jaw tightening as he reached for the device, his grip almost painful as he stared at the screen. "What is it?" Eliza asked, her voice filled with concern. Edward let out a frustrated sigh, his fingers running through his already tousled hair. "It's something I need to handle," he said, his voice clipped, his entire demeanor shifting from tender lover to ruthless CEO in a matter of seconds. Eliza's heart clenched, a strange sense of unease settling in her chest. Edward turned back to her, his eyes softening slightly as he cupped her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "I'll be back soon," he promised. "And when I do, we're finishing this conversation." Eliza swallowed hard, nodding as she watched him rise from the bed, slipping into his clothes with a practiced ease that made her heart ache. As he reached the door, he turned back, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Don't think about running, Eliza," he warned, his voice dark, possessive. "You're mine, and when I come back, I'm going to make sure you never forget it." Eliza's breath caught as she watched him walk away, leaving her alone with nothing but the echo of his words and the overwhelming realization that she had already given him everything: her body, her heart, her soul. There was no turning back now. Eliza lay in bed, staring at the ceiling long after Edward had left, her heart still racing from his words, from the way his touch lingered on her skin, like an unshakable imprint. "Marry me, Eliza." His voice echoed in her mind, sending waves of emotions crashing over her. Had she truly heard him correctly? Had the powerful and ruthless Edward Carter just asked her to be his forever? The intensity of his confession had left her breathless, but before she could even gather herself, reality had pulled him away. She hugged the pillow close to her chest, inhaling his lingering scent, musky, masculine, intoxicating. How had her life changed so drastically? Just weeks ago, she had been struggling, living paycheck to paycheck, desperately trying to survive. And now, she was wrapped in silk sheets, drowning in the possessive love of the man who had not only stolen her body, but also her heart. She closed her eyes, replaying every moment of their night together the way he had touched her, worshipped her, possessed her as if she were the only woman in his world. "You're mine, Eliza, and when I come back, I'm going to make sure you never forget it." His words burned into her soul, making her shiver despite the warmth of the blankets. There was no denying it anymore. She belonged to Edward Carter, completely and irrevocably. But was she ready for forever? Could she handle the depth of his obsession, his overpowering love, the way he made her feel like she was drowning in him? The sound of the door unlocking snapped her out of her thoughts. She sat up abruptly, her pulse quickening as she watched Edward stride into the room. He had barely been gone for an hour, yet the hunger in his eyes made it seem as if he had been starved of her for years. His tie was loose, his shirt slightly wrinkled, as if he had rushed back the second his business was handled. Eliza barely had time to react before he was on her, his hands gripping her waist, his lips crashing against hers in a kiss so demanding so desperate that it stole every ounce of breath from her lungs. She melted into him, her fingers tangling in his hair as he deepened the kiss, claiming her all over again. "I couldn't stay away," he murmured against her lips, his voice thick with desire, his hands moving possessively over her body. "I don't care about anything else. Eliza, not my meetings, not my business, just you." Eliza trembled as he pushed her back onto the bed, his weight pressing her down, his eyes dark with raw need. "Edward," she breathed, but he silenced her with another deep, bruising kiss. "Say yes," he demanded, his lips trailing down her neck, his teeth nipping at her sensitive skin. "Tell me you'll marry me, Eliza. Tell me you'll be mine forever." Eliza gasped, her mind clouded with the intensity of his touch, the heat between them so overwhelming she could barely think. "Edward, I," he growled, his grip tightening as he pulled back to look into her eyes, his expression fierce, unrelenting. "Do you love me, Eliza?" he asked, his voice low, almost vulnerable. Her heart clenched at the raw emotion in his gaze, the desperation in his voice. She reached up, cupping his face, her thumb brushing over his cheek. "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her confession. "I love you, Edward. I love you so much it scares me." A sharp exhale left his lips, and then, without hesitation, he captured her mouth in another searing kiss, pouring every ounce of his love, his devotion, his obsession into her. He kissed her until she was breathless, until she had no choice but to surrender completely to him. "Then marry me," he whispered against her lips, his forehead pressed against hers. "Be mine, Eliza, forever." Tears burned in her eyes, her heart pounding as she whispered the one word that changed everything: yes. The moment the word left her lips, Edward let out a low groan, his lips crashing against hers in a kiss so deep, so intense, that it sent shivers down her spine. He pulled her closer, his hands roaming over her body, as if he was trying to memorize every inch of her. "You won't regret this," he promised, his voice rough, filled with raw emotion. "I'll spend every day proving to you how much I love you, how much I need you." Eliza smiled against his lips, her fingers tracing the sharp angles of his face. "You already do," she whispered. Edward exhaled, his forehead pressing against hers as he held her close. "Then let me show you again." And he did. The night was filled with whispered vows, tangled sheets, and the kind of passion that left no space for doubt. Edward loved her with every fiber of his being, and Eliza knew without a doubt that she had made the right choice. As the city lights flickered outside, Edward held her in his arms, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her skin. "We'll get married soon," he murmured, his lips pressing soft kisses along her shoulder. Eliza sighed in contentment, nestling closer to him. "I can't wait." Edward smirked, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. "Neither can I." But until then, his eyes darkened with mischief, his fingers teasing the edge of the sheets. "I need more nights with you, Eliza." Eliza laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Then take them, Edward. Take all of them." And with that, the night stretched on, filled with endless love, whispered promises, and a passion so fierce it could never be tamed. The night wrapped around them like a velvet embrace, the city lights flickering through the massive windows of Edward Carter's penthouse. Eliza lay beneath him, her chest rising and falling in rapid breaths as Edward trailed his lips down the column of her throat, worshipping every inch of her, as if she were the very air he breathed. His touch, his scent, his warmth, all of it, had become something she craved more than she had ever thought possible. It had started with a single night, an accident, a collision of two strangers, but now she could no longer imagine a life without him. And tonight, she had sealed her fate with one word: yes. Edward had asked her to marry him, and she had given him her heart, her soul, her forever. His body pressed her deeper into the mattress, his hands roaming over her bare skin with a kind of reverence that made her shudder. His kisses were slow, sensual, leaving fire in their wake, a fire only he could quench. But he didn't rush. No, Edward was never one to rush when it came to her. He wanted her to feel everything, to understand the depth of his need, his obsession. "You're mine now," he murmured against her skin, his voice dark with possession. "Do you understand what that means, Eliza?" Eliza gasped as he nipped at her shoulder, her fingers threading through his hair, tugging him closer. "Tell me," she whispered, her voice trembling with anticipation. Edward lifted his head, his gaze locking onto hers deep and unwavering. "It means you belong to me, forever. It means no matter where you go, no matter what happens, You'll always be in my arms, in my bed, in my heart." His fingers brushed against her cheek, his touch achingly gentle. "It means I will never let you go." A shiver ran down Eliza's spine, her heart pounding at the intensity in his words. She had never felt so desired, so completely and utterly claimed. "I don't want to go anywhere, Edward," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I want to be with you always." A low growl rumbled in his chest, his lips crashing against hers in a kiss so deep, so demanding, that it left her breathless. His hands tightened around her waist, pulling her impossibly closer, his body molding against hers with a desperation that sent fire coursing through her veins. She felt his need, his hunger, his love so raw, so unrestrained, that it made her dizzy. Edward broke the kiss, his forehead pressing against hers, his breath hot against her lips. "Eliza," he said, his voice hoarse, as if he was barely holding himself together. "Say it again." Eliza smiled, her hands cupping his face, her fingers tracing the sharp angles of his jaw. "I love you, Edward," she whispered, her eyes shimmering with emotion. "I love you so much." A sharp exhale left his lips, and in the next second, he was kissing her again, his movements frantic, desperate, as if he needed to prove his love with every touch, every caress. Eliza melted beneath him, giving herself to him completely, letting him consume her in the way only he could. Their love was fire and obsession, a storm that neither of them wanted to escape. Hours passed, the world outside fading into oblivion, as they lost themselves in each other, their bodies tangled, their hearts beating in unison. It wasn't just passion, it was something deeper, something infinite, something neither of them could ever walk away from. When exhaustion finally claimed them, Edward pulled Eliza into his arms, holding her close as if he feared she would disappear if he let go. His fingers traced lazy circles on her back, his lips pressing soft kisses to her forehead. "I'll never get enough of you," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Not in this lifetime, not in the next." Eliza smiled sleepily against his chest, her heart swelling with love. "Good," she murmured, "because I don't ever want you to stop." Edward chuckled, his grip tightening around her. "Tomorrow, we'll start planning the wedding," he said, his voice filled with determination. "I don't want to wait, Eliza. I want you as my wife as soon as possible." Eliza lifted her gaze to meet his, her fingers brushing over his lips. "Then let's do it," she said softly. "Let's get married, Edward." His eyes darkened with something deep, something unshakable. "You have no idea how happy you've made me." She smiled, her fingers trailing over his chest. "I think I do." Edward exhaled, his forehead pressing against hers as he held her close. "You're everything to me, Eliza, everything." She felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of his love. "And you're everything to me, Edward." Edward let out a low groan, his lips capturing hers in another slow, sensual kiss, one that promised forever. "You're mine," he whispered against her lips, "and I'm never letting you go." As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, Eliza knew with absolute certainty that she had found the love of her life, and in just a few days, she would become his wife. Little did they know, their love story was about to take an even more beautiful turn. The day had finally arrived. The grand ballroom of the most luxurious hotel in the city was transformed into a scene from a dream. Golden chandeliers casting a soft glow, white roses cascading from the ceilings, and the scent of fresh lilies filling the air. Every detail had been planned with perfection, for this was no ordinary wedding. This was the moment Edward Carter, the powerful and ruthless CEO, would bind himself forever to the only woman who had ever touched his heart. Eliza, dressed in a breathtaking wedding gown that hugged her curves like a second skin, stood in front of the mirror, her fingers trembling slightly as she touched the delicate lace veil draped over her shoulders. Her heart pounded wildly, excitement and nerves twining together. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined a love like this, a love so deep, so consuming, that it left her breathless. Behind her, the door opened, and a soft gasp left her lips when she saw Edward step inside. He wasn't supposed to see her before the ceremony, but rules had never been something he followed. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his sharp features more breathtaking than ever, his piercing blue eyes locking onto her with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. "I couldn't wait," Edward murmured, his voice deep and husky as he stepped closer, his fingers reaching out, brushing against her cheek. "You look like a dream, Eliza." A blush painted her cheeks, as she gazed up at him. "You're not supposed to see me before the wedding," she whispered. But she didn't stop him when he pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her possessively. "I don't care about traditions," he breathed, his lips pressing against her temple. "I just needed to see you. I needed to remind myself that this is real, that in just a few minutes, you'll be mine forever." Eliza's heart swelled with emotion, her fingers curling into his suit. "I've always been yours, Edward," she whispered, "from the moment we met." His jaw clenched, and in a swift move, he cupped her face, his lips descending onto hers in a kiss so deep, so full of love, that it stole the air from her lungs. He kissed her as if he was branding her, as if he wanted to leave no doubt in her mind that she belonged to him. "I love you," Edward murmured against her lips, his voice rough with emotion. "And I can't wait to spend the rest of my life proving that to you." Tears welled in her eyes as she smiled, her hands caressing his face. "Then let's go," she whispered. "Let's get married." The ceremony was nothing short of magical. As Eliza walked down the aisle, her eyes locked onto Edward's, the rest of the world faded away. Every guest, every sound, every breath, none of it mattered. There was only him, only the man who had stolen her heart, the man who had vowed to love her, protect her, and cherish her until his last breath. Edward's hands trembled as he reached for her, his gaze never leaving hers as she stood before him. The officiant spoke, but Edward barely heard a word. All he could see, all he could feel, was Eliza, the love of his life. The woman he had once thought was just a fleeting night, now standing before him as his forever. "I, Edward Carter, take you, Eliza, to be my wife," he vowed, his voice filled with unwavering devotion. "To have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, from this day forward. You are my world, my heart, my everything. I will love you, cherish you, and protect you for all eternity." Tears spilled down Eliza's cheeks as she whispered her vows, her voice shaking with emotion. "I, Eliza, take you, Edward, to be my husband. You are my best friend, my greatest love, my home. I vow to stand by your side through every storm, through every joy. My heart is yours, now and always." Edward's grip on her hands tightened, his eyes dark with overwhelming emotion. And then, as the officiant finally spoke the words that sealed their fate, Edward didn't wait. He cupped Eliza's face and kissed her with everything he had, pouring every ounce of love, desire, and devotion into that single moment. As the guests erupted into cheers, as the world celebrated their union, Edward whispered against her lips, "Mine." Eliza laughed softly, her hands threading through his hair. Forever. The wedding night was nothing short of a storm of passion. Edward carried her into the honeymoon suite, his eyes ablaze with need as he kicked the door shut behind them. Eliza barely had time to gasp before he pinned her against the wall, his lips capturing hers in a searing kiss. "You're mine now, Mrs. Carter," he growled, his hands roaming over her curves. "And I intend to make sure you never forget it," Eliza moaned, arching into him, her fingers gripping his shirt as he lifted her effortlessly, pressing her body against his. "Then show me," she whispered, her breath hitching as he trailed hot kisses down her throat. Edward didn't need to be told twice. He undressed her slowly, savoring every inch of her, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. Their bodies tangled together, moving in perfect harmony, their love spilling over in breathless whispers and desperate caresses. It wasn't just passion, it was something deeper, something unbreakable. Hours passed, and still Edward couldn't get enough of her. He kissed her again and again, his hands never straying from her body, his love for her burning brighter than ever. And as they finally lay tangled in the sheets, exhausted yet utterly content, Edward pulled her close, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "I love you," he murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare back. Eliza smiled, her heart bursting with happiness. "I love you too," Edward exhaled, his arms tightening around her. "Sleep, my love, because soon we'll have another reason to celebrate." Eliza blinked up at him, her brows furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean?" Edward grinned, his eyes gleaming with something deeper, something knowing. "I just have a feeling," he whispered, his hand slipping protectively over her stomach. And just like that, their love story took the most beautiful turn of all. 9 months later, Eliza lay in Edward's arms, cradling a tiny, perfect baby girl against her chest. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she stared down at their daughter, her heart swelling with a love she had never known before. Edward pressed a soft kiss to Eliza's temple, his eyes filled with nothing but adoration. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Eliza sniffled, brushing a gentle finger over their daughter's tiny hand. "She's ours," Edward exhaled, his heart overflowing with love. "Yes, she is." He gazed at Eliza, his wife, his forever. "And so are you." Eliza smiled through her tears, her fingers threading through his. "Forever, Edward." Edward leaned down, capturing her lips in a soft, lingering kiss, sealing their love, their promise, their forever. And as their baby girl cooed softly between them, the family they had built, the love they had fought for, was finally complete. Years had passed, but Edward Carter's love for Eliza had only grown stronger, deeper, more consuming. Their life together had become a beautiful dream, one filled with love, passion, and the family they had built. He watched from the doorway of their luxurious villa as Eliza sat in the garden, their daughter, little Stella, nestled in her lap, giggling as her mother braided her soft, dark curls. Edward leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips as he took in the sight before him, his two greatest loves. His heart swelled with pride, with gratitude. He had everything he had ever wanted, no, more than he had ever imagined possible. The ruthless CEO who once thought love was a weakness was now a husband, a father, a man completely and utterly devoted to the woman who had changed his life forever. "Are you just going to stand there and stare, Mr. Carter?" Eliza's teasing voice pulled him from his thoughts. A slow smile spread across Edward's lips as he pushed away from the doorway, striding toward them. "Can you blame me?" he murmured, bending down to press a lingering kiss against Eliza's lips, his hand cradling the back of her neck. "I have the most beautiful wife in the world, and a daughter who's just as breathtaking." Stella giggled between them, her tiny hands reaching out for her father. "Daddy, kiss me too," she demanded, pouting up at him. Edward chuckled, scooping her up into his arms and kissing her chubby little cheeks. "How could I ever resist my princess?" he murmured, tickling her belly until she erupted into laughter. Eliza watched them, her heart melting at the sight of the man she loved being the most perfect father. This was everything she had ever wanted: a home, a family, and a love so deep it felt infinite. As the evening sun bathed them in golden light, Edward sat beside Eliza, his arm draped over her shoulders as Stella played with her dolls on the grass. He turned to his wife, his eyes soft, full of unspoken love. "Eliza," he whispered, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, "are you happy?" Eliza smiled, her fingers tracing over his jaw, her touch featherlight. "I've never been happier, Edward," she whispered back. "You've given me everything." Edward exhaled, his forehead pressing against hers. "No, Eliza, you gave me everything. You gave me love when I didn't know I needed it. You gave me Stella, our beautiful family. You gave me a reason to believe in forever." Tears shimmered in Eliza's eyes as she cupped his face, her lips brushing softly against his. "Forever," she echoed. Edward deepened the kiss, pouring all his love, all his devotion into it. No matter how many years passed, no matter how many nights they spent in each other's arms, he would never stop wanting her, never stop loving her. She was his heart, his soul, his entire world. And as Stella giggled beside them, as the sun set on another perfect day, Edward knew without a doubt this was the love that would last a lifetime.